As I mentioned, this is a trip that I did in November 2016 with a small South African birding tour group called Birding Eco Tours. And actually Eagle Eye, which is a Canadian birding tour group, acts as their agent here in the US and North America. So this was done in November 2016, and it started on the coast, on the Atlantic coast, and moved basically east and north until I finished up at Victoria Falls. And it was about a 3-week trip. And the itinerary was really, I think, set up by Rock Jumper. So they either start you in the west and finished on the east, and then they reverse the route. So you start in Zambia, Victoria Falls, and work your way through Namibia, going west all the time. Bit of background about Namibia. It's a very large state above South Africa, southwestern Africa. Has very early history, early Stone Age settlers, about 750,000 years ago. Then a series of tribes came through from the east, starting with the Bantu, then the San, Herero, and the Awampo, who are currently the dominant tribe in Namibia. In the 1880s, it became a protectorate of Germany. After World War I, became administered by South Africa. And post-World War II, South Africa annexed Namibia, which didn't go down too well, but the locals, a resistant group, Swampo, started seeking independence in 1966. This led to a series of minor wars and major wars, like a proxy war between the East, Angola, heavily supported by Cuba, communist Cuba, and the original guerrilla Swampo against South Africa, which was finally settled in December 1988. They achieved independence in March 1990, and the economy is still very closely tied to South Africa. It has a very small population, 2.1 million. The economy is dependent on particularly diamonds. They're one of the major diamond producers, countries in the world, but also uranium, lead, zinc, tin, silver, and tungsten. And just after World War II, when everybody was going to atomic energy, they supplied a lot of the uranium ore to Europe and also to North America. Another big economy drive is the cold Benguela current. Is very rich in plankton, comes up from the Antarctic, abundance of anchovies, pilchards, mackerel, and other whitefish. Most of it is canned and exported because most of the population lives in the eastern part of Namibia. Then tourism is about the third most important to their economy. A lot of wildlife safaris, adventurous trips, fishing. You've got dune buggies driving over the sand dunes, and there are 5 habitat types. A narrow coastal strip, Namib desert, Karoo, I'll explain a little bit more what the Karoo is, arid savanna, moist savanna, working their way to the eastern boundary. Okay, so this is a map of the habitat types. So this is Namibia. So it's a chunk, and then this narrow strip, what I talk more about, it's called the Caprivi Strip. Strange history. So you see the Namib desert, we have the cold current coming up here. Then we have the Karoo, which is really very arid, stony desert. Then we have the arid savanna, so there's a few trees there. Then we have the moist savanna, and it's moist not 365 days. So it has a wet and a dry season, and I'll talk more about that. And then I want you to look at these Etosha pan. This one, this one here, Magadadishi pan, and then one way over here, which you can't see, which is in Tanzania, called Lake Natron. And I'll come back to that in a second. So again, this is the map of Namibia. Down here, the boundary is here. This area here is where they do the diamond mining, and it's totally protected. It's called a Sperrgebiet, which means that it's just controlled by the mining. And then we have Walvis Bay, right up here to the boundary with Angola. And here's the start of the strip, which we'll come back to in a minute. So this is the early part of my trip. I started in Walvis Bay, down here on the coast, moved up to Spitzkoppe, moved up to Hawab Lodge, which is in part of the Namibian escarpment, then right up here to the border, and then across to Etosha National Park. There are 3 entrances to Etosha National Park. It's a massive park. So here and here. And so we start our journey at Walvis Bay. Now, Walvis Bay is on the coast, and I'm going to focus just on the most important bird at Walvis Bay. There are lots of shorebirds there. I did a pelagic trip, saw lots of pelicans, cormorants, lots of shorebirds, or waders, as we call them in South Africa. And so the main item of interest here is the 2 flamingo species, the greater flamingo and the lesser flamingo, both of which this particular population is about 50,000 that spend the non-breeding season here. Lesser flamingo has more specific feeding, and so is suffering a little bit more than the greater flamingo, which has a more varied diet. And here we see a mass of, on the shoreline, a mass of mainly lesser flamingos. You notice that they've got a deep red bill. This one looks as if it might be a greater, but they appear to be a big flock of lesser flamingo. And here we have a flight picture. This is the shoreline here of lesser flamingo. I want to compare that with greater flamingo. The breeding success has not been, this particular population is really struggling because there's just 3 breeding sites that they have available. And I'll talk more about their success when we go to Etosha Pan. Etosha Pan is one of the 3 saline areas that they breed. Now I'm going to show you a brief video. There are 2 things I want you to study. One, what is the feeding habitat of these flamingos? And I'd also like you to see if you can see a greater flamingo in this mass of lessers. Okay, so this flamingo is doing the feeding, upturned bill, trying to filter. Ah, there's the greater, just disappearing off the screen. So the lesser flamingo is less adaptable because it only feeds using the filter of the upturned beak. The greater is more able to take crustaceans, fish, etc., and has a more varied breeding habitat. So it's somewhat more successful. And I would add that the greater flamingo also occurs in Europe, south of France, and also into Asia, as does the lesser flamingo. But the lesser flamingo is the one that's really struggling in this population in southern Africa. That's all I want to say about Walvis Bay. As I said, in the interest of time, let's move on to the other infrastructure, which is just maybe 2 or 3 miles behind even and less than that, maybe a mile behind the coastline. And the coastline gets weather very much like Northern California in terms, because of the cold current, it's misty in the morning, and then gradually the sun burns it off, but it's always a cool temperate, never gets much above 60. But as soon as you go 2 or 3 miles inland, then of course the temperature really gets high. So this is an example of one of the sand dunes. This is about 300 foot high. And there's a more distant view. So you see down in the gullies, there's sort of a succulent grows. It gets a minute amount of really it's mist that's and dew that drops on the leaves, okay, at nighttime. So, and then there are very special birds that just live in the desert. I've given an example of 2 larks, and it was possible to see on my trip 18 different species of lark. They all basically look the same. They have very specific habitat types. And so the one on the left is the grey lark. And you notice the spelling. We are using British English. It's grey lark. And on the right, the dune lark. Both of these are endemic to this particular part of Namibia. And basically it's the only place to see these 2 particular larks. I will perhaps show you one more lark, but otherwise they all look the same. Moving north now to Spitzkoppe. This is a massive granite that goes above the Karoo. This is the Karoo Desert. You see it's very stony, arid, a lot of succulents and bushes. This massive peak is like the Matterhorn of Europe. Gets close to 6,000 feet above the plain. And there's some special birds there. One's called Herero chat. It's a member of a fair number of these small finch-like birds, the chat family, which live in this Karoo, which is a stony desert. This one's named after a tribe, the Herero tribe, that sort of like hunter-gatherers that frequent this area, and their population is very low because hunter-gatherers, they have to move around to search for the prey and food. And on the right, we have something called the white-tailed shrike. And then it's the only lovebird that we get, a rosy-faced lovebird. I think some of you have seen this in Arizona because it was introduced and I think has become adopted into the eBird lists. It's accepted, but they're native. Then we move further north, and 2 examples of the guinea fowl that frequented the lodge. This is in a stony escarpment. You can see it's still pretty arid. Guinea fowls, they're in full flocks. They are used for food. Tastes pretty nice, by the way. And on the right, I have an example of the spurfowls or francolins. And that was one of, I think, 8 different species I saw. But it's a game bird, a bit larger than our partridges. And this one's called the red-billed francolin. And then to a very special bird. This is in fact a rock runner. It's about 6 inches, 7 inches long, and is a member of, it's actually a warbler. And the family is called microsphenid. It's a strange family that's just been pushed away from the Bradypterys family, and is unique to Namibia and just across the border in Angola. And a rock runner. It's not a rock jumper, it's a rock runner, okay? And a variety of species of sandgrass shown here on the left. And you see it's very arid. This is habitat prefers arid savanna. You see the sandy soil, rocky soil. And it's called double-banded because of the two bands on its head. Okay, there is something called there's another sandgrass called also called banded, full-banded. Sorry. Each sandgrouse needs to come in once a day to pick up water, and in the breeding season, they pick up water for their fledglings in the breasts. This particular sandgrouse comes in at dusk. Okay, I'm going to show you another one which comes in at a different time of the day. On the right, we have an example of a family, the Batis family. It's like a shrike flycatcher. It's unique to Africa. And this is called the Pirit Batis, and that's a male. Also an example of some of the birds around the lodge. We have the grey go-away bird that came to a water feature. And then on the right, I have an example of 5 or 6 species of hornbill that I saw on my trip, Montero's hornbill. And 1 or 2 examples, I have a brown snake eagle, also seen at Awab Lodge. This feeds obviously on reptiles, particularly lizards and the occasional snake. And on the right, an example of the weaver family, southern masked weaver, of which our house sparrow is a member of that big group. And this is a male southern masked weaver. They make a big nest. This one makes just an individual nest for the pair. Moving north quickly, we're now right on the northwest edge. So behind the lodge, so I'm looking south of the lodge, we see this scenario of a river lodge, moist savanna. It's actually on the fringe between moist savanna and arid savanna. But you can see there's a fair amount of vegetation in the trees. There are still gaps between the trees. And this is the other side from the lodge. So on the left-hand side, we are still in Namibia. On the right-hand side is Angola. And Namibia is still relatively vegetated. On the right, you can see it's pretty arid. You can see there's hardly any green vegetation on the Angola side. And there's Angolas come across, they're not allowed to bring their cattle across, but they come across because they can get some money from the tourists who go to the lodge. They work the boats and everything like that. About an hour's drive south of the lodge, a couple of us took a trip very early in the morning to be there at the Zebra Mountains. And the Zebra Mountains are in the background. And you notice these are very, very rocky, hardly any vegetation there at all. And this is the habitat of the Angola cave chat. And this is most active at dawn and dusk, which is why we had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. The reason is, as you can see, these big rocks. So I had to climb over maybe 50 rocks to get close to this thing. Wasn't too great, even with a trekking pole. And they're most active at dawn and dusk. It's been called Angola cave chat until a few years ago. They were only found in Angola, but just about 6 years ago, they discovered a small population just come across the border. And they're called a cave chat because they breed in these caves in this heavy rock. And they're probably not active during the heat of the day, because you can imagine with these rocks, temperatures really heat up. So a picture of the Angola cave chat on the right, sorry, on the left, and on the right we have Cinderella waxwing. And I thought, and that's a member of about 10 species of waxwing, an African species. And I think some of these become well adapted in cage birds throughout the world. And I thought, Cinderella, that's a strange name. So I went to the Google and I said, Cinderella, that's a girl's name, right? What does it mean? Apparently, it's a girl's name of French origin, meaning little ash girl. And I thought, that's interesting. What does the word actually mean? It means little ashes. So you understand where the name comes in terms of the gray, basically gray plumage of the waxwing. And again, this is a special bird of this area. There's maybe 50 of them in this part of Namibia. Most of them are just across the border in Angola. Some pictures of waders, three-banded plover, a bit like a killdeer to some extent. On the right-hand side, we have a water dicker. I want you to notice the really big eyes. This is predominantly, it's a thickney, member of the thickney family, and it's most active at night, hence the big eyes. Here's an example of a Verreaux's eagle owl. And the most noticeable thing about this one is the pink eyelids. Big eagle owl, even bigger than our great horned. And on the right, one example of a woodpecker, bearded woodpecker, 5 or 6 species, very similar to this. An example of, in the left-hand side, of the 5 or 6 glossy starlings that you can see on this trip. This one happens to be called Neve starling. And on the right, a picture of the giant kingfisher. Along the riverine and in the savanna palms, we have a rufous-tailed palm thrush. A mockingbird. It has a very loud song and is extremely good at mimicry of other bird songs. And on the right, I have bare-cheeked babbler. This is really a special babbler family, tend to go around in groups on the ground. A bit like our magpies, I guess, they work in family groups. This is the bare-cheeked babbler, which is a speciality of this particular area in Namibia. Right, moving now east to Etosha National Park. This is the iconic picture that you'll see in any tourist magazine, any tourist brochure. Normally, there's a lion here resting in the shade, but there wasn't one there. But I want you to look in the background here. This is the saline pan. It is 80 miles wide, 80 miles long, 45 miles wide, and it, in the wet season, and not every year, with plentiful rain, it becomes the breeding ground of the flamingos that I was talking about. So in the breeding season, this is one of the 3 pans that the population of flamingos breed. Unfortunately, they haven't had too many good years. Now, fortunately, the flamingos live to a long life, maybe as long as 50 years. So this, in Etosha National Park, roughly every 2.6 years, they attempt to breed. Every 7.1 years, they have a successful breeding. So if 20,000 lesser flamingos come here, they can improve their numbers by about 10,000. But that's only happening every 7 years here in Etosha. The breeding success in the other 2 saline lakes is a little better, but not much. So this particular population is really struggling. As I said, their numbers are quite good in Asia and in East Africa. So Etosha National Park, apart from the skyline, they have a wet season. I'm here in the dry season. And so this is the typical habitat, all right? So we have zebras here, and we have impalas or springbok, okay? I just want to give you an idea. Plenty of mammals and wildlife to see at water holes because they're fed by artesian wells. So Etosha National Park is really great for wildlife viewing because all you have to go do is go to the water holes. And here's the iconic animal of both of Namibia, it's the national, and also of Botswana. It's called the gemsbok, and it is pretty heavy bird. It's 400 pounds. It has meter-long plus horns. It's an antelope, which is adapted to living in very arid conditions. So this bird, this antelope can go 5 or 6 months without any water except what he can get from plants and vegetation. And on the tourist map of Namibia, you'll see a picture of gemsbok walking over the sand dunes. So it's in there, all their tourist brochures, it's the gemsbok. And one more iconic, just to show you the habitat type with the common ostrich, which is adapted to this very arid habitat type. Now to some of the characteristic birds. On the left, we have crowned lapwing. On the right, double-banded courser, which, because of the heat, is predominantly nocturnal, is a member of, there are some coursers you can find in India, but by and large, they occur only in Africa. There's a few species that occur in the Sahara Desert, but most occur in the Karoo, here in Southern Africa, double-banded. You can see why it's called double-banded. Okay. And then another characteristic is the bustard family. The smaller bustards are called korhans. So on the left, we have a male, a northern black korhan. On the right, we have the Kori bustard, which is the largest bustard, can just about fly. The largest bustard in the world, Kori bustard. And then back once more to the sociable weaver. Here's a male on the right-hand side. And on the left, we have the reason why it's called sociable. That is a massive nest shared by about 80 pairs of sociable weavers. Still in Etosha National Park, the example of southern white shrike, we have an adult on the left, and on the right, we have a young bird at the cup nest with the female right behind it. And then one example of the 16 or 17 species of lark I was talking about. On the left, we have a gray-backed sparrowlark, and on the right, a sabota lark. And they all look the same. Another family that you can see at Etosha National Park is the purple roller, a member of the roller family. These are large birds which perch up high and go for large flying insects and even lizards. And on the right, example of a wood hoopoo, a violet wood hoopoo, long bill and a long tail, about the size of a crow or a magpie. An example of one of the owls that you can see, African scops owl. This was seen in one of the lodges, which is in midway of the park, which obviously at night has a big electrified fence to prevent anything coming in. But it's such a wide that you can walk about and look in the trees and look for the nightlife. And on the right, here's an example of 5 or 6 species of kestrel that you might see. These are greater kestrels. It's an adult pair. On the left, we have African cuckoo. And this is very much like the Eurasian or common cuckoo, which migrates obviously to Europe. This one is resident here, but it does the same thing of parasitizing the other birds. And on the right, we have a blue crane, which is an endangered species. The majority of the population is in South Africa, particularly the northwest part. There is a small isolated population here in Etosha, Namibia, blue crane. We only saw one of these, and their population is very small, struggling a little bit with climate change apparently, and the fact they're not getting as much, the wet season's getting shorter and less as we go. So we were lucky. So now I want to cover the this eastern part of, this is the Caprivi Strip. So Etosha National Park's over here. So we're coming up here, following the river. Here is Okavango Game Reservation. And here is the Okavango River. So the Okavango River goes down into Botswana. And here's the Okavango Delta, which I'm sure you've heard. Is fed from seasonal rains in the mountains of Angola, flows down here, and gradually dries out over the time. So this is a major national park in Botswana. We didn't go that far. We just crossed across the border, just for half a day into Botswana. But we spent the majority of our time along the Okavango River. And then we moved further up to a couple of lodges up here. So we're just, this is still Angola, and then we come into Zambia, and this lodge here is along the Zambezi River, and then we ended up at Victoria Falls in Zambia. Here's a picture of the Okavango River. So this is the dry season, so there's still a fair amount of water coming down. And here's a typical example of some of the swampy areas that get off the main river. A lot of lily pads and papyrus. I think this is papyrus. That's, yeah. With some special birds. On the right-hand side, we have a coppery-tailed cuckoo. It's a crow-like bird, bit of a predator. And another example of one of the babbler families. It's unique to this area, called Hartlaub's babbler. Hartlaub was one of the explorers in the 1800s in this area. Around the lodges, white-browed robin chat, most active at dawn. It gives a very loud song. A member of the robin chat family. Is about 5 or 6 species here in southern Africa. And on the right, a bulbul, dark cap bulbul, one of the most common birds that you might see. And then 5 or 6 different species of bee eater. The one on the left, little bee eater, is small. On the right, we have white-fronted bee eater. And then the one that everybody wants to see, southern carmine bee eater. On the left, you see them nesting in a clay bank. And on the right, you see an adult bird, southern carmine bee eater. And then a flight picture of one in flight, which I'm pretty proud about. This was taken at a different colony. They are also ground nesters. So this is heavily protected with electrified fences and everything. So on a sandy soil, they use rodent holes or they excavate them. And so it's like a grid pattern. Every 3 feet, there's a nest. And so this is the southern, and they nest colonially. So this particular colony had about 60 pairs. And we had to be careful not to knock down the electrified fence, etc. But it was a great sight to see them actually nesting on the ground. southern common bee-eater. Another, coming back to sandgrouse, this particular of sandgrouse preferred arid savanna, and this bird comes in to get water, and most sandgrouse need to come in once a day to pick up water. And in the breeding season, they not only drink, but they trap water in their breast feathers and take it back to their fledglings. So we have here a male and a female virtuous sandgrouse feeding at the water edge. These birds came in at 9 o'clock, so that's about 2 to 3 hours after dawn. And here on the right-hand side, you see them flocking in to the edge of the Okavango River. Some of the other birds along the Okavango River are African simmer, very much like a black skimmer, nest colony on sandbars. And on the right, a long-toed lapwing, which is particularly adapted to walking on lily pads. This happens to be on the shore, long-toed lapwing. And that's a good lapwing to get, don't always see it. So we're proud to get that. African fish eagle, that's a typical, see that throughout Africa. On the right-hand side, a small kingfish called a malachite kingfisher. There are 5 or 6 species which look similar to this, but malachite because of the sort of the riffing of the plumage on the head here. And then some examples of species that use the lily pads, African hasana. So it's somewhat more colored than the Central and South American northern hasana. And on the right, an African purple swamp hen, which looks it's in the same family as the swamp hens that you might get in Florida. On the left, I'm afraid we have a picture of the back view of a Pell's fishing owl. This is one of the #1 birds that people want to get when they go to the Okavango. And they're fishing owls, they're most active at night. The problem is that they roost, they don't always roost in the same tree. So all the guides go out at dawn to see if they can find where the fishing owl is roosting that day. Well, by the time we found this, we couldn't get in. So it was high up in a tree, very windy, and that's the best I could do. But it joined my world list. So I was we're all very pleased to see it. On the right, I have a picture of a Goliath heron. And just to put in perspective, down here, we've got blacksmith plovers, which are quite large plovers. They are bigger than golden plovers, about 12 inches, and just shows you the size of the heron. I thought I'd show you that to you. We're now back away from the river on the Caprivi Strip, and there's some typical birds. I'm going to show you one picture of a black collared barbet, very heavy bill, fruit eater, and on the right, an example of a helmet shrike. This is Retz's helmet shrike. And there are 5 or 6 species of sunbird, which is the equivalent, I guess, of the Central American hummingbirds. On the right, I have a white-breasted sunbird. And on the right, sorry, on the left, white-breasted sunbird, on the right, purple-banded sunbird. And you can see the purple band. Both of these are males. And just like hummingbirds over here, the females are drab olive green. Another species that we were able to see, I just give an example, is the turacals. This is Charlot's turacal. They're mainly large fruit-eating family, and they're about 12 inches long. And in flight, they have a sharp red underwings, really stand out. On the right, I have a wood owl, African wood owl. Some more families I want to show you in the Caprivi Strip. A parrot, Mayer's parrot. And on the right, an oriole. This is a black-headed oriole. Still in the Caprivi Strip. Something, a boo-boo. This one's a tropical boo-boo, family of 4 or 5 of these in Africa. It's a bit shrike-like, but it isn't a true shrike, family of its own. On the right, another picture of broad-billed roller. And then at the eastern Caprivi Strip, the woodland that changes and becomes what they call Miambo, or Miambo woodland. And this is, has a wet and dry season. In the dry season, which lasts about 9 months, the larger trees drop the leaves to preserve moisture. And you see that it's a sandy soil, doesn't retain moisture. Mainly, most of the nutrition comes from dead leaves. You've got sparse bushes and not a lot of greenery. So I was there in November. The wet season wouldn't start much before February or March, and it's a fairly short season. So there are different classes of birds. One is the lizard buzzard here on the left. As the name, it's a lizard, snake, hunting buzzard, about the size of our red-tailed buzzard. On the right, another barbet, Miombo pied barbet. Right in the eastern part of the Caprivi Strip, as I showed you, just before you get into Zambia, I stayed at a beautiful lodge called the Kalizo Lodge. And you see in the background the Zambezi River. So this side, I'm in Namibia, and over here is Zambia. So in the wetlands around the lodge, we were able to see a gallinule, Allen's gallinule. And on the right, we were able to see another member of the Hasana, the lesser Hasana. And this one is quite a difficult one to see. We only saw 2 on the trip. So it was a bit of a mega bird. As you can see, it's far less colorful than the larger Hasana, African Hasana. And then there were plenty of waterfowl, flight pictures of African pygmy goose, and flight pictures of white-faced whistling duck. And if anybody's been to South America or even Central America, you may have seen these birds. They're exactly the same species. One of the few that go across continents. I think there's a gull that goes across into Africa, across into South America. Some examples of the stork, African open-billed stork. And on the right, a squacco heron, which is a bit like an egret, or like our black-crowned night herons. And actually, black-crowned night herons also occur in Africa, same as they occur over here, North America. An example of the cuckoo shrike family. This one's a female, otherwise male will be black, that's what it's called. And I think they get their cuckoo shrike from the barring on the breast. They make a cup nest, they do not parasitize other birds. And on the right, I have a picture of one of the 5 or 6 species of woodland kingfishers. So this isn't necessarily associated with water. It's a woodland kingfisher, brown hooded. And here's a picture of me, just to prove that it was me taking a picture. On the left is the Zambezi River. I was getting towards the end. And then I thought I would finish my presentation with a showing of the Victoria Falls. This was in the dry season, so you can see there's still plenty of water. It's one of the natural wonders of the world. And but about 2 or 3 years later, they had a particularly dry season, and this totally dried up. There were no waterfalls at all. It has subsequently recovered, but of course, for tourism, it is a major tourism attraction, and really basically supports the tourism in Zimbabwe, which is in a sad way. It is shared between Zambia and Zimbabwe. I actually took this picture from the Zimbabwe side. Okay, that concludes my presentation.